Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year of 2021. And that brings us to that work which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1081. And it is from 1973. And it is a work directed by Juri Ozerov, Zetterling, and Arthur Penn, Pfleghar, Ichikawa, Miloš Forman, Claude, Lelouch, and John Schlesinger. And the name of the work is Visions of Eight. This is the work from 1973, and it is a documentary, or it is a capturing of representations or perspectives on the Summer Olympic Games of Munich, Germany in 1972. So the Munich Summer Games, the Olympic Games. In that way, this is, in a sense, a type of documentary covering various perspectives and vantage points in respect of the games. And those vantage points or perspectives are provided by these 8 directors in these various segments, these 8 segments that form the whole, which is Visions of 8, produced by David Wolper, who himself is very famous in terms of his TV producing credits. Here he is bringing together these various artists to express specific aspects of the Summer Games, the Munich Summer Games from 1972. So in that context, this is an extraordinary, fascinating, documentary, cinematic document look into specific aspects of the 1972 Summer Games. Now, on the face of the work, the documentary work itself, we have, as I say, 8 components or 8 shorts or 8 separate films that are then coming together in what could be said to be a type of omnibus work. So the first work is credited to Juri Ozerov, which is called The Beginning. And this is, in a sense, a type of way to use montage and music to try to express the excitement in the air, the thrill in the air that exists leading up to or a countdown of sorts leading up to the actual official start of the games, and all the human drama that will then play out in the context of the sports and competition. And then the next segment is directed by Zetterling, and we have here the segment which is called The Strongest. And The Strongest is focusing in on weightlifting competitions and the participants in such competitions, and also the preparation and practice, as well as the very specific human details in terms of the physicality of the athletes and their various exercises and rituals prior to or during practice, and then during the actual Olympic Games events themselves. And also some very poignant scenes that capture some of those lovely human moments at the end of such competition, as well as other circumstances involving the construction of the actual event venue itself, or the breakdown of such venue from another point of view. Also some interesting use of audio in terms of cataloging of diet, and also cataloging of materials used, etc. And all this to juxtapose or to create a juxtaposition between the endeavor of the human spirit in the form of these really um, high-level athletes, and also aspects of the games themselves. And so this is the segment which is, again, directed by Zetterling, which is called The Strongest. And then we get to the next segment, which is The Highest, and this is the segment directed by Arthur Penn. And this is a really fascinating segment which is focusing in on the pole vault competition involving the athletes that are required to clear a certain height in this particular Olympic event. And it's expressed in a way using a very skillfully applied photography and slow motion and sounds and silence as well, to give this sense of the impressionistic in capturing the details of these athletes and participants as they are trying to excel in this particular event. And again, these details show the very lovely and humanistic minutia of, say, the expressions on people's faces, etc. Some of the participants as well, Bob Segerin, etc., shown here. But that brings me to another point too, which is very important. Here and in the other segments, we don't get necessarily a type of almost TV-like reportage cataloging of the events themselves and the participants. We don't get a list of, say, all the athletes that were involved, or you don't get the results of that sort. This is not like TV coverage. This is, in fact, quite the opposite. It is a cinematic, impressionistic type of depiction of the games from the viewpoint of the visuals, from the use of the slow motion to capture the games in a way that is not televisual in the sense of being like a televised event, but rather in terms of the cinematic, which is a wonderfully applied paradox. And it's also referred to in some of the supplements too, about how David Wolper, who is himself a type of TV producer, is looking at this not in the sense of TV production, because perhaps this was coming into form at a time where TV was already very prevalent. So in fact, one of the philosophies of the film is to capture the games not in this televisual style, but in fact in a very cinematic style, thus asking directors like Arthur Penn and Zetterling and Juri, Ozerov and others to participate in each of their segments. So this is a really fascinating type of philosophical approach to capturing the Olympic Games as expressed in, say, this particular segment, for example, The Highest by Arthur Penn. And then to continue on, we have the next segment, which is called The Women, Michael Pfleghar's work. And this focuses in on the aspect of the games, the female athletes who are involved in the games. Now, this particular segment, I think, in some of the writings on this film, as well as also the commentary track, which is part of the Criterion release, this has been perhaps criticized as being a segment that maybe has not aged so well over time, to put it in a certain way. And I think that's a very fair criticism. At the same time, of course, there are certain aspects to this particular segment that I think are very, very fascinating, and I think the commentary track does a really excellent job in pointing some of these out. In particular, the way in which it focuses in this very poetic way on the gymnastics, women's gymnastics, and the uneven bars, Ludmila Torsheva and her routine on the uneven bars, which is, again, shot and shown and represented in this pure cinematic way that shows the grace and beauty and the real skill and high level, the athletic level of this particular athlete. So this is, I think, one of the strengths of this particular segment. And then we go to the next segment, which is from Ichikawa, which is referred to as the fastest, and focusing in on the 100-meter dash event and looking at the various participants in a type of slow motion way. And perhaps this is very much not dissimilar to the way in which, say, the event might be shown on broadcast television right now in terms of slow motion, focusing in on each of the participant athletes, etc. But here we have, at this time, Ichikawa, who is, of course, also, we are reminded, responsible for the earlier and one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Olympic-related documentary, Tokyo Olympiad. And so here he is training his eye once again on one of the events, and he looks upon the 100-meter dash as a type of metaphor for human existence and human endeavor, which is a really fascinating way of putting it. So that is that segment. And then we go to the segment called the decathlon, Miloš Forman's segment. And here we have this very interesting juxtaposition, of many different forms. So first we have the focusing in on the decathlon event itself, but again, not in this television type of way, but more in the cinematic, impressionistic way. And then we have aspects of music and art and Bavarian culture that are juxtaposed in this fashion. Now, some might view this as a means by which German and Bavarian culture are being expressed in this film, which is about the Olympic Games that is taking place in Germany. However, another way to look at this segment is to see it as a type of ironic or sarcastic view, or a wry, humorous view on culture at the time, and perhaps, and I think the commentary track does a really good job of explaining this, or hypothesizing about how this is perhaps also a type of expression of the cinematic voice of Forman, as in terms of his instincts as a filmmaker and his anti-authoritarian instinct that comes into play, and it's expressed in this sarcastic, ironic manner in this and other films from his filmography of the period. So, a really fascinating example of the filmmaking style and craft, as well as another approach to expressing a certain aspect of the games as it's relating not just to the sport itself, but also to the culture of the host nation. And then we go to the next segment, which is called The Losers, Claude Lelouch's section. And this is another fascinating one because it's focusing in not on the winners, not on the medalists who get the recognition of the media and also history, but in fact we get the participants who do not reach the first, second, or third place finishes, do not medal, but in fact they get results that don't lead to a medal. Now, this is, I think, a really, in many ways, it's shown in a way that shows the different sides to the games, and especially when we are reminded of the fact that these athletes put their hearts and souls and their very lives, and they give up so much in order to devote their time and energy and effort, and so much time and energy and effort devoted to achieving the highest level of athleticism as possible, and then that being tested in this very moment of the Olympic Games, again depending on the event, shows the real depth and scope of the human drama that is at stake. And here we have that on display in this portrayal that is very much an intimate human portrayal by Claude Lelouch. It's one of my favorite segments from this overall work, so it's a really fascinating one. It continues to be fascinating to this day. And then we get to the concluding or the final segment from John Schlesinger, which is called The Longest. And it's focusing in on the marathon event through one particular marathon event runner, Ron Hill. But also this work brings in to the discussion direct references to one of the other aspects of the Munich 1972 Games, that makes it famous or infamous, and that is, of course, the terrorist attack and killings regarding the Israeli Olympic team during the Games, which was a very horrifying event, which is a very horrifying event, and it is, as I say, it is the infamous event that is perhaps that is one of the most defining parts of the Munich Games from 1972. And so here we have direct references to this event that took place. Now, this brings into the discussion another aspect of why this documentary is really fascinating. It's how it seems to treat, or at least on the surface, seems to treat or not treat this particular attack and killings with respect to the Israeli Olympic team. Now, the documentary, I think admittedly, doesn't go into a lot of detail. It doesn't provide this documentary type of journalistic coverage of what happened regarding this particular really terrible event. It doesn't do that. It does, again, rely on these cinematic, impressionistic techniques in order to give us a little bit, or to remind us as viewers of what happened. But as I say, this film, or the philosophy of this film, is not as a type of journalistic coverage of the events of the Olympic Games overall. Thus, it doesn't go into this type of detail regarding the terrorist attack. However, it does refer to it, at least in this particular segment. It doesn't make reference to this in all the segments. There is one brief mentioning of the tragedy, and that mention is made in the first segment, the Ozerov, the beginning segment. But the most direct reference is made during this final segment. And so it serves as a reminder. It also reminds us that this is a type of impressionistic cinematic work that focuses in, or it seems to, or purports to be focusing in, on the games themselves, while also trying to figure out, perhaps in real time, in a certain way of speaking, how to address this particular point. And perhaps for some, that might be one of the sources of criticism for this particular work. In fact, according to some of the supplements and in fact the writings that are included in the booklet, that indeed was one of the sources of criticism when it was initially released, according to, again, those materials. But now looking back on it, after some years have passed, of course, when one engages in the discussion of the Munich Games from '72, of course, this horrific event, this tragic, horrific event, is, of course, very much linked with such games. And so it is part of that discussion, or part of that consideration. But in that way, too, it does not go unnoticed when we have an examination of this film, which is, I think, one of the fascinating aspects of this. And indeed, it does remind us, too, that another aspect of those games was indeed the games themselves. And so in that spirit, we have this collection of 8 shorts, 8 short films, 8 different perspectives that touch upon, in their own ways, specific human drama, or specific aspects of the human drama that were unfolding during such games in 1972. And so in that way, this collection, this overall work, is really fascinating. This is Visions of 8. The Criterion Collection has this year released this work, Visions of 8, in this individual Blu-ray release, and it's a really great release for a number of reasons, which I'll try to get to. Now, I should point out first that on the back, and also in the booklet, it's described as being a new 4K digital restoration of the work. I should point out that this is not, of course, the first time that this film is appearing in physical media format from the Criterion collection, because it was also included as part of the 100 Years of Olympic Films Criterion release from a couple years back. So it was released in this box set before by Criterion in physical media form, but now we have it in this individual Blu-ray release. And I should say too that based on what I can gather, it looks like it's the same restoration source material in terms of what we get here versus what we get or what we got in the earlier box set. Again, I can't be quite sure, but based on what I saw in terms of the end credits and doing a side-by-side eye comparison, it looks to me, to my own amateur eye, to be very close, if not exactly the same. And so, but we are getting still here a really great presentation. So it's really good to have this, as I say, a memorable documentary, which is very memorable for a number of reasons. Now, getting to those reasons, or getting to, with regard to an actual specific discussion of the film, what makes this individual release really excel is the fact that it also includes a number of supplements that weren't found in any previous release as far as I'm aware. And so that makes this really well worth it indeed. So the first thing that we get is a really great audio commentary track. And this is a new audio commentary track. And this is from Amanda Dobbins and Sean Fennessy and Chris Ryan from The Ringer. And they are podcasters. They are also cinema enthusiasts and experts, and they are also sports enthusiasts and experts. And this is the perfect combination of expertise, because they are talking about it. All three of them have this great intelligence and energy. It is such a great commentary track. I immediately became fans of them. They are really great, and they each bring their personal experiences. Sometimes they talk about what their experiences were like as athletes who maybe participated in similar types of events when they were in school, for instance, and also talking about the athlete perspective and all the rigor and training and more training and hardship and focus and energy that it takes in order to reach a certain level, only to then be tested at this moment, which is the Olympic Games. And so they really bring this great sense of perspective, as well as providing all this informative, detailed background about the filmmakers, about the production. They talk about Wolper, they talk about Mel Stewart, they refer to the connection between Mel Stewart, Wolper, and things like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. They talk about each of the filmmakers, Ozerov, the beginning, for example, how perhaps there was maybe more influence made in that section by, say, Wolper than the director, or they're referring to other specific aspects of the production. They have some very fair and reasonable critiques to make towards the Pfleghar work, but also praise it for its depiction of the uneven bars event. They also make reference to the Arthur Penn segment, or they make reference to all the segments. For example, the Arthur Penn segment, about how it's this really heightened impressionistic type of mode. And they also mention the fact that there is no director voiceover, unlike the other segments as well, which is another interesting detail. They talk about My Zetterling's work, The Strongest, which came out prior to the highest, the Penn work, and they talk about the quirky details and the loving portraits and the sportsmanship that is on display, etc. And then they also talk, going to the discussion of the Ichikawa work, they also talk about how close it seems, it feels to actual televised 100-meter dash or track and field events as well, the use of slow motion, etc. And then the Miloš Forman work, they do talk about how it also is a type of sarcastic critique quite possibly so anyway, or one of the interpretations, possible interpretations anyway, as a type of sarcastic critique of the German games, and how perhaps it might have to do not just with Miloš Forman's filmmaking style and craft, but also his biography and certain details about his biography in World War II. And then that leads to a discussion of Claude Lelouch and the focus in on the losers. This brings into the idea or the notion that this is a documentary that's not about, say, the athletes like the Spitzes, etc., but rather this is a documentary focusing in on the minutiae, the detail that is very much through the lens of these individualized perspectives of these directors, including Lelouch. And so, what a fascinating take that these people bring to the commentary track, and also brings us to the John Schlesinger work, and how this brings into the equation or discussion how the film does or does not address the terrorist attack, and also how this is also a story about obsession, and how very much training and athleticism is about obsession, about obsessing and focusing in so much on this sport or this event, the marathon run, and how it, in many ways, it's type of, at least it's expressed in the hands of Schlesinger, a type of solitary event, and how that is an intriguing way connected to with Schlesinger's own cinema. So for these and other reasons, this commentary track is astounding. It is one of the best commentary tracks I've heard, and it's fresh and exciting. I love the way, too, that it ends. I don't want to spoil too much, but they have this type of ranking. They use the gold, silver, bronze way to rank their favorite segments from the entire Visions of Eight. So that's such a fun segment and a great fun way to end the commentary track. So if you get a chance, please check out the commentary track. It is a wonderful one, a great addition to this individual release of Visions of Eight. So please check it out if you can. And that's not all, because then we get this wonderful, informative documentary called Munich 72, The Making of Visions of Eight. It's approximately 54 minutes. This is wonderful. This is a great supplement or complement to the earlier commentary track that I was referring to. There's a lot of overlap of information. It's great that way. There's also a lot of supplemental information as well. So listening to the commentary track and watching this documentary, that is a great combination indeed. Now, coming to this documentary itself, what's so great about it is, well, a number of things. First of all, we have a number of participants, each providing so much information. Claude Lelouch is interviewed, also Robert Lambert, a supervising editor, Samba Gadjigo, who is the biographer of Usman Semben. And Semben is also very crucial in terms of the production history of this film that we find out more details on in some of the writings as well as in this documentary itself. And then the Olympic Games historian, David Clay Large, and then David Wolper's son, Mark Wolper, and then Arthur Penn's son, Matthew Penn. And so we have these participants in this documentary giving their takes, their specific takes. For instance, we get some really great details. Some of these details, or many of them, have already been highlighted elsewhere, such as some of the writings that can be found in the booklet that's included with this individual Blu-ray release. But still, this is such a great reinforcement of such information. Or again, if one is watching this or reading this or watching this film for the first time, this is fresh information. So really fascinating. For example, about how there could have been, say, the participation of Zeffirelli or Fellini, or what happened in terms of the so-called potential participation of the director Federico Fellini. Also, how other directors like Bergman were considered. And also Leni Riefenstahl, what her relationship was to the production, why it was maybe that she wasn't ultimately involved here. The phrase here is Leni Riefenstahl was tainted by her past. And then also there is a discussion here about Semben, the filmmaker Semben, and what it was that he might have brought if this film became Visions of Nine. one of those visions being Sam Ben's vision, but it ended up not being the case for certain reasons that are alluded to by the editor and others. And so, but it's a really fascinating thing because we do see some of the footage. We do also see Sam Ben at work, and so we get a sense as to what his segment might have been had it been finalized and included. And then we go into a discussion of the specific shorts or the specific segments in the final work, for example, the Arthur Penn segment, and how maybe the pole vaulting event wasn't his first choice. Maybe that we find out that he was actually perhaps considering the boxing event, but it ended up being a different event that was the focus of his segment. And also we get, in terms of the Forman segment, the idea of the humor. And it's an interesting detail about how Wolper himself actually insisted, according to the documentary, it seems like he insisted that there be humor as part of the Forman segment. So that might be an indication of the reasoning, or one of the reasons why his segment had the certain tone that it did. So if that's the case, that's a very interesting theory or interpretation of the underlying basis of that of the Forman piece, the decathlon piece. And then we get to Claude Lelouch. His comments are so wonderful and extraordinary. There's a really a classic moment where we see one of the Olympic officials falling asleep as he is sitting in the chair in the stand somewhere. And this is part of the decathlon segment. But we realize, according to Claude Lelouch, that in fact this was something that Claude Lelouch himself shot. And it was a piece of footage that Miloš Forman asked to borrow to use for his segment. So that's a really interesting bit of information right there. It's a very famous segment. It's a very funny part of that Forman segment. So again, Lelouch was there. And we also find out too, or we are reminded too, about the Schlesinger work and how in fact John Schlesinger was really intent perhaps of having more coverage and more discussion of the terrorist attack and killings. And so but that didn't necessarily translate into what ended up becoming the final product of his particular segment. But it's a very interesting thing to hear that, in fact, he was pushing for more focus on that particular event. And so that actually is an indication of what the dilemma was for the filmmakers and for producer Wolper and others in trying to figure out a way to best handle this very shocking and tragic and unexpected situation that confronted them and the entire world, in fact. And so we get a little bit of an indication there. And also there's an indication of how the film was initially received, the Cannes Film Festival and initial critics' reception, etc. And then its overall legacy, again, as a type of work that is very much, in an interesting way, antithetical to the approach of television and television broadcast. And it's taking the opposite approach, in a manner of speaking, namely the cinematic. And so that is, I think, the underlying philosophy, and perhaps in the course of the span of time, in the passage of time, one of its underlying strengths, perhaps. And I think that too is one of the strengths that's highlighted, say, in the earlier commentary track discussion. So once again, this documentary, this 54-minute documentary, is brilliant. It is so brilliant. So please check this out if you can. So much information and presented so clearly and so well organized. So again, that is the documentary. And then to conclude the supplements, we have a approximately 6-minute or so extended type of promo from 1973. It's a type of extended trailer of sorts. It's called On Location with Visions of Aid. And again, it's a really interesting way to see the contemporary period promotional material And then we have a trailer to round out the supplements, and it's a very interesting one, so please check it out if you can. And then we have this wonderful presentation from Criterion. We have this lovely depiction of various aspects of the human form engaged in some kind of athletic event, thus the spirit or the representation of the Olympic Games here. A really wonderful design. Art directors Eric Skillman and Sarah Habibi, design La Moutique. So it's a wonderful, colorful design. I really enjoy it, and I love the font use, etc. And it's also continued on into the booklet, and it's a thick booklet, stapled, and it's wonderful. And I'm a big fan of the stapled booklets, and so we get some writings, a number of writings. First we get Olympic Visions of 8, and this is the George Plimpton writing from 1973, Sports Illustrated, and this is so great. This is again another great way to supplement or complement the information that was provided in the commentary track or in the documentary, and we get it from this particular early 70s article, and specifics about the filmmakers and also some of the details of the production, a lot of the details of the production, in fact. And so this is such a great writing to have included, so well done for having it included here. And that's not all, because we also get an excerpt from the 2003 memoir from David L. Wolper, called Making Visions of 8, and this too is so great. We have more details about the production, certain specifics from Wolper himself about specific use of music or dealings with some of the directors prior to and during production, dealing with the tragic historical events of the games, and what to do, what the decision-making process was, etc. And so another really, really great and essential essay, comments from Wolper himself. So really worth it if you can read that. And then we have another essay from author Sam Lipsyte, which is Time and Motion. And this is another great one. This is another depiction, or not depiction, this is another interpretation of the work itself, and it also examines each of the segments. It does go into, for example, some great insight into, say, the Pfleghar segment called The Women, or the Ichikawa segment, etc. And this is another great take. I love how we have different perspectives on the different perspectives. You know, we have different perspectives as expressed in Visions of 8, and then we have different perspectives from the various participants on the commentary track, the Plimpton essay, the Wolper excerpt, and then now the Sam Lipsyte essay. So this is so great, and another great booklet, packed with information, packed with pictures, packed with stills. There's a particular section in the middle, which is this artwork right here. Well done. This is so interesting. It's on, and then some of the pictures here as well of the filmmakers, so as well as other pictures as well. So well done for this. This is a great presentation, and I am very much impressed indeed. It was really nice to have, as I say, the earlier box set, the Olympics box set, but to have this individual release with these extra supplements and to have this information provided makes for illuminating, fascinating, and very, very informative discussions. I am not at all an expert when it comes to the history of the Olympic Games, let alone the specifics of the events of the 72 Summer Games. And so in that way, this work doesn't provide me with the event-by-event coverage. But that's not the point, right? The point is a different type of perspective and a type of impressionistic take on the games in the cinematic style, or in these varying cinematic styles. And also hovering above it all, or in the background, or in the back of our minds, will probably be too that specter of the tragedy of that sudden and unexpected and very horrific and tragic event that also befell the games during that time. And that is also a very infamous part of these games. And while it can be said that this particular work perhaps doesn't address it in a way that one might expect, it still does address it in a way that feels so relevant, while at the same time being consistent with the approach and philosophy of this work, Visions of Aid. And so this Criterion release, the individual release, goes so far, in my view, in terms of showing us the film itself, to present the film, and also presenting the background and historical context and production reasons for its presentation. And in that way, this Criterion presentation, in that way, does also serve a purpose in reminding us of the various important historical events that are part of these games. And so this film is great, and the Criterion release here that from this year is also great indeed. This is Visions of 8. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.